If you've watched some of my previous episodes, you know I don't shy away from tough topics, such as the debate between Star Wars and Star Trek, or Batman and Superman. So today I'm going to handle another topic that's been sweeping through fandom, and that is a comparison between A Song of Ice and Fire and Lord of the Rings. And while there's certainly a popular opinion that Game of Thrones is better than Lord of the Rings, I don't think it's fair to make that statement until we take a good look at both franchises and the authors who penned them. The Lord of the Rings focuses on the epic battle between good and evil, as is played out through Middle-earth's quest for the One Ring. It is heavily influenced by Tolkien's study of epic poetry and his own wartime experiences in the trenches of World War I. A Song of Ice and Fire primarily deals with morality in regards to the political intrigues and war for the Iron Throne. It is heavily influenced both by the War of the Roses, in which English nobility fought over control of the throne, and Martin's own experiences in the brutal world of network television. So let's take a look at how both these sagas stand up in comparison to one another. Now, both A Song of Ice and Fire and Lord of the Rings are fantasy series set in worlds that are fully developed and very detailed. And being fantasy worlds, they have a lot of similarities. I mean, they both have dragons, and they both have wizards, and they both have undead creatures seeking to destroy the world of the living. And while both these series look very similar, there are some key differences in Martin's world that some people could argue make it feel a little more realistic. For instance, Tolkien's inclusion of other races in Middle-earth, such as elves and dwarves and hobbits, whereas Martin's cast of characters is almost entirely human. And while the inclusion of these races might make Tolkien's world feel a little more foreign, they actually end up serving the same purposes as the noble houses of Westeros. You see, as Tolkien was crafting his races, he gave them each specific strengths, but also some logically comparative weaknesses as well. If the elves were noble and wise, they could also be arrogant and distant, while the dwarves, who were rugged and brave, could also be petty and greedy. And the hobbits, who were simple and honest, could also be stupid and lazy. Comparatively, we see the same sort of thing in Martin's great houses. While the Lannisters are intelligent and at times valiant, they are also power-hungry and vindictive. With House Stark, we see them as very honorable and brave, but often very naive. And this is just the way both authors demonstrate that you don't get virtue without vice. Another way these two series differ is that Game of Thrones is generally seen as darker in tone, primarily due to its inclusion of sex and gratuitous violence. And I have to argue that darker does not necessarily equal better. I mean, how many teenage emo kids do you know that are poet laureates? I mean, seriously, tell me if you know one, because I can't think of any, ever. And of course, some people say that all the sex and violence makes the Game of Thrones characters seem more relatable. I'd say if you find incest and torture relatable, seek therapy.
Power resides where men believe it resides. It's a trick, a shadow on the wall.
Power and its effect on people is a common theme in both franchises. In A Song of Ice and Fire, it's most readily seen in the conflict over the Iron Throne, and in Lord of the Rings, it's embodied by the One Ring itself. And this is one of the areas where the series begin to drastically differ from each other. In Lord of the Rings, it's known that if Sauron ever reacquires the ring, he'll be unstoppable. And Frodo is tasked with safeguarding the ring until he can destroy it in the fires of Mount Doom. And yet there are a couple instances in which he actually offers to give it away.
If you ask it of me, I will give you the One Ring. You offer it to me freely. I do not deny that my heart has greatly desired this.
Everyone is tempted by the ring, and while some people follow that temptation, others manage to resist it even when the opportunity to seize the ring is presented before them.
would you destroy it?
I would have gone with you to the end. Into the very fires of Mordor.
In the films, this option is given to Aragorn. However, in the novels, it's actually Faramir who makes this choice. But either way, it's really J.R.R. Tolkien's way of stating that good men can refuse the trappings of power. In Westeros, we get a different philosophy. And despite Varys' mantra on its intangible nature, everyone is concerned with the amount of power they wield. Whether it's achieved through force of arms, plotting and scheming, or obligation and duty.
There sits the only king I mean to bend my knee to. The King of the North!
Even the honorable Starks will always accept power when it's presented before them. And if we do a quick side-by-side comparison, we see that in The Lord of the Rings, there are several characters who either refuse power or willingly give it up, while those who don't often suffer for it. However, in A Song of Ice and Fire, we see that no one ever refuses power. And while those who accept power don't always suffer because of it, no one also gives it up willingly either.
When you play the Game of Thrones, you win, or you die. There is no middle ground.
And sure enough, those who cannot effectively manage power end up paying the ultimate price. And I don't know if it was Martin's intent, but it seems the lesson throughout his series is the strong do what they can and the weak endure what they must. Now, another interesting thing I noticed is what happens when we look at who is allowed to wield power in both series. In A Song of Ice and Fire, all the major characters, everybody who drives the plot, comes from the noble houses. They're either kings or queens or princesses or major lords or ladies and that sort of thing. The one exception seems to be Bronn, who is just a common mercenary and has an effect on the plot even though he's a common mercenary. And while initially Lord of the Rings looks very similar, we do have some big exceptions in the form of the hobbits. See, none of them come from noble or powerful families. In fact, I'm not even sure they actually had jobs. But they still had a dramatic impact on the world. In fact, it's almost as if J.R.R. Tolkien was using them as a metaphor. It is also instructive to see how both series handle morality, despite having different ethical landscapes. In Lord of the Rings, morality is seen as very black and white, whereas in A Song of Ice and Fire, morality is more varying shades of gray. And while I could probably do an entire video just on the moral dilemmas faced in each series, I think it's more instructive to take a look at the consequences of moral decisions in each franchise. In Tolkien's world, mercy and compassion is often rewarded. It's Bilbo who feels pity for Gollum and spares his life. Likewise, Frodo also feels compassion for the miserable creature and tries to redeem him. And it's these acts which ultimately leads to the ring's destruction. And for the counterpoint, we have this.
Quite the little climb, aren't you? How old are you, boy?
10.
10. The things I do for love.
Jaime Lannister never suffers any consequences for pushing Bran out that window. And while yeah, he did spend all those months in chains, I don't think that's really a fit punishment for somebody who attempted to murder and then crippled a 10-year-old boy. And yet when Jaime intervenes to prevent Brienne from getting raped, he loses his hand because of it. It seems in A Song of Ice and Fire, no good deed goes unpunished.
When the king returns from his hunt, I'll tell him the truth. You must be gone by then. You and your children. I will not have their blood on my hands. Go as far away as you can, with as many men as you can. Because wherever you go, Robert's wrath will follow you.
It really is Ned's mercy, compassion, and sense of honor that lead to his downfall. And indeed, it seems like all the Starks just can't seem to deal with a world that doesn't share their own moral value. They fail while the cruel and sadistic thrive. And this is a worldview Tolkien certainly didn't share. And while George R.R. Martin has rolled the karma wheel down on some of his characters, it doesn't seem in proportion with the general population. Now, to be fair, there are still 2 more installments in Martin's series that we get to look forward to. But all things considered, I'm not going to expect a philosophical turnaround anytime soon. To finish this up, I want to take a look at one more thing, and that's how both authors deal with death. Of course, George R.R. Martin is renowned for killing off his main characters, and over the course of his series, he's wrapped up quite a body count. Tolkien, on the other hand, is much more conservative when it comes to killing off his main characters, and it is true that sometimes they come back. But death in the Tolkien world seems a little more poignant.
They took the little ones. Stay still. Frodo. Where is Frodo? I let Frodo go. Then you did what I could not. I tried to take the ring from him. The ring is beyond our reach now. Forgive me. I did not see. I have failed you all. No, Boromir. You fought bravely. You have kept your honor. Leave it. It is over.
And I think it's particularly interesting to look at both the death of Boromir and the execution of Eddard Stark, and not just because both characters were played by Sean Bean. You see, while both deaths are tragic, Boromir's ultimately is heroic and redeeming, whereas Ned's is simply cold and brutal. And with all the violence in Westeros, I think there's actually only one character who earned himself a heroic death, and that's Dancing Master Syrio Forel.
Take her.
Are you men or snakes that you would threaten a child?
Get out of my way, little man.
I am Syrio Forel.
Foreign bastard.
And you will be speaking to me with more respect.
Kill the Bravosi. Bring the girl.
Arya, child, we are done with dancing for the day. Run to your father.
Bloody oafs.
Be gone now, Arya.
Come with me. Run.
The first sword of Bravos does not run. What do we say to the god of death?
Not today.
Go.
Sure, Tolkien offers us a more romanticized worldview, but it's also more optimistic. Sure, things are going to be tough and we're going to face hardships along the way, but things will work out in the end. There's evil in the world, but there's good too. With Martin, you'll be going along, having a good time, then all of a sudden your pregnant wife gets stabbed repeatedly in the stomach. And all the while there's a horde of nigh unkillable ice zombies waiting in the wings to destroy everything. Safe to say Martin has a more pessimistic view of the world. I still think the question, which is better, is largely a matter of personal opinion. And for me, while the land of Westeros would be a fun place to visit, I wouldn't want to live, or more likely die, there. And while everybody's making the comparison to A Song of Ice and Fire now, I think in another 15 to 20 years it'll be some other series that they're comparing to Lord of the Rings. And J.R.R. Tolkien will still be the gold standard when it comes to fantasy storytelling.